last week when we were discussing Korbon Pesach, I had read the Rambam, which is basically paraphrase of the Mishnayos and the Tosefta there, describing the differences between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. And I had offered an explanation there that I thought was clear. I will now go into more elaboration because there are those who said, oh, but that's not what, let's say, the standard commentaries point out. And I said, yes, indeed, that's not what the standard commentaries have. And just opening up these easy ones that we use, the Koren and Akbili, they didn't mention this point. I thought it was obvious. I'll now explain why I thought it's obvious. I'll put this on the screen before we get to everything else. Tell me, by the way, if you can see this. I should put it on the screen. Hold on. Here you go. Here's our Hilchos Korbon Pesach. Let's review a little bit over here. Well, let's also restate what we were saying before. There was no Pesach Sheni this week, even though there were those activists who tried to make a show of it on Wednesday. That was yesterday. They tried to make a big deal about trying to offer Pesach Sheni. But the halacha is and always was that Pesach Sheni, we only go through with it if Korbon Pesach Rishon actually happened and happened the right way. Even in temple times, Pesach Sheni wasn't always on the table. If Pesach Rishon happened and it wasn't the Rov, or it wasn't Bitara, as we saw, then there was no Pesach Sheni. So this year, even if there had been a temple, we would not have had Pesach Sheni. And we're actually going to go into that. There's an interesting Tosefta that describes the situation, which we'll see forthwith. But first, let's look at this halacha over here. See? Here we go. It said, Pesach Sheni, Chamed Sumatzi Mobabayith, Umotzinoto Chutz Leveit Achilato. We mentioned that there's two halachic issues. One is a mitzvah and one is a halacha. That is, sometimes you have many halachas that don't count as individual mitzvahs, but just halachas that are there that describe how to perform the mitzvahs. So there is a prohibition of removing the meat of the Korbon Pesach from the house in which it is being eaten, the house. And Chazal say, why does it matter as the house? Because the group, the chavura, who decide to eat Korbon Pesach together, they have to eat the Korbon Pesach in a defined place with mechitzot, with halachically recognized barriers, not necessarily a roof. And if there's another group nearby, let's say in the same room, so this room here has four mechitzot, has four walls. There's an entrance and a window, but the entrances and windows don't count. They're buttos and mechitzas. If we had two separate groups eating Korbon Pesach in this room, we would have to build partitions between them in order to eat properly. And removing the meat of the Korbon Pesach from its particular location, beyond its partitions or its walls, that would invalidate that particular meat, and that meat would be contaminated from a ritual standpoint and all sorts of things. So that is a prohibition. That's an explicit verse in the Torah. Lo totzi min habayit min habasar chutza. Don't take from out the house any of the meat outward. That's one of the negative commandments. And by the way, I'm just thinking back, the way we had our Sidorim without Korbon Pesach back in Pesach Hotel, because remember, it's a mitzvah to have, if you're in Chutzlar, it's a mitzvah to observe your Passover in a Pesach Hotel, of course. And that's the chumrah that many try to keep despite the financial hardships, Baruch Hashem. So we used to have, I don't know, 100 Sidorim going on in one room, one large room. Sometimes it got kind of crowded, a little bit noisy. But if you'd have Korbon Pesach in, let's say, a hotel in Jerusalem, if there was a hotel within the halachically recognized borders of old Jerusalem where one could eat sacrificial meat, and you'd have a large dining room like that, so you'd have to put mechitzas between every table and every group, because that's how it works. Unless they're all one big chavura and they're eating together, then they could do this. But I don't know if they would, one Korbon Pesach would suffice for all of them. That's what the Korbon Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni have in common. Don't have in common. Pesach Rishon has a prohibition. You can't take it out of the place, whereas Pesach Sheni, like we say over here, Motzinoto, you could actually take it out of its partitions. There's no specific commandment to keep the Pesach Sheni where it is. Just like there's no commandment that Pesach Sheni to go over the entire Haggadah and have 4 cups of wine. 4 cups of wine is, of course, a non-biblical commandment. So you don't have the Haggadah. You don't have to start telling your children about Yitzias Mitzrayim. And there's no independent mitzvah of matzah, but you do have to eat the Korbon Pesach with matzah, etc. And then it says over here, V'ne'achalin tzoli v'vayit echad. And both the Korbon Pesach and Pesach Sheni are eaten roasted. Yes, that is halacha. Just like you have to roast the Korbon Pesach. You have to roast the Korbon Pesach Sheni, and you can't eat it. You can't eat it cooked some other way. B'vayit echad, within one house. So there are many say bayit echad, but he just said that the Pesach Sheni can actually be removed from the house in which it is in. And in this case, bayit doesn't mean the physical house. It is a reference to a different verse in the Torah, which is not counted as a mitzvah, but is considered a halacha, which is Pesach is only eaten by the minuyim, those who sign up beforehand. And there are many halachas that govern how the Korbon Pesach can only be slaughtered on behalf of those who have signed up to eat it, and it can only be eaten by those who were legitimate members of the club before the Pesach was slaughtered. And those people had to be ritually pure, capable of eating, not in prison. They have to be close enough to Jerusalem. They what else? They couldn't be they couldn't be uncircumcised. They have to be present. There's many halachas regarding all those people, and here it is saying that they are both eaten by the bayit echad means by the minuyim. Why? Because apparently the halachot regarding the minuyim apply equally to Pesach Sheni. So I'm surprised that those commentaries didn't notice this, because the Rambam was basically discussing it for a few chapters. There's this whole issue about what if the Korbon Pesach is lost, and what happens? They have to replace it, or they have to split up the group. If we can't find the Korbon Pesach, then the replacement will count for us and not count for you. We haven't seen all those halachas ourselves, but those of us who are learning on the Hebrew side on Shabbos, we've already begun to see these halachot. So it is clear that this reference over here, when Rambam says that both are eaten sali, and then it says b'vayit echad, he's referring to both are eaten only by the minuyim and not by outsiders. Okay, so that's what this is a reference to, and God willing, as we go through the halachot in the coming weeks, we will point this out, that this rule of minuyim, just like it applies to Pesach Rishon, applies to Pesach Sheni. If there's any questions about that, one of the guys left. Have a good day. It was nice to see you, and have a good Shabbos. Okay, so let's open up the Tosefta here, which is we're going to see why it's applicable to this case. Matter of fact, also, I think that we're going to take some time to go through the entire Tosefta of Maseches Pesachim to find interesting halachas and ideas, many of which are brought throughout the Masechta in the Bavli. As a matter of fact, you could look at the footnotes. You see that a lot of the Tosefta on any given Masechta actually ends up being discussed in the Talmud, but a lot of it is not. So let's put this on the screen over here. This issue that was, this goes by the Rambam. Okay, here it says, this is halacha that comes up, an interesting chakira. Someone who was unable to do Pesach Rishon, so he's pushed to Pesach Sheni. The Gemara brings up the case, and the halacha brings up the case of two individuals who were technically not obligated to keep the commandments when Pesach Rishon rolled around, but then when Pesach Sheni rolled around, they actually were obligated. Who are we talking about? The convert to Judaism. He intended to convert to Judaism, perhaps even went through the circumcision, but even after the circumcision, he's not Jewish until he immerses himself in the mikvah. And we have the case of the bar mitzvah, someone who only comes of age. He becomes obligated in the commandments after Pesach Rishon, but before Pesach Sheni. So there's going to be a Pesach Sheni. So here the Tosefta says, Ger shnif gayer ben shnei pesachim, sarich laso Pesach Sheni, divri Rabbi Nathan. Rabbi Nathan says that if you have a fellow who converts to Judaism between the two Pesachs, so he is supposed to perform Pesach Sheni. He was unable to perform Pesach Rishon. Sorry, Divri Rebbe, that's what Rebbe says. Rebbe feels that he was disqualified from the first, does the second. Rabbi Nathan Omer, ain't sarich laso Pesach Sheni, shekavar lo nitchayev barishon. Why should he have to do Pesach Sheni? He was not obligated to do Pesach Rishon to begin with. He was a Gentile at that time. This machlokes Rebbe and Rabbi Nathan. Last week we saw that Rebbe and Rabbi Nathan have a long argument about the nature of these two holidays. We saw that the Ravad mentions this with regards to how Pesach Sheni affects a person who missed Pesach Rishon, a person who was fully Jewish at the time, and we brought the Gemara there. So please reference that shir from last week. What about this case? Nitam lahem liyisrael livnot beira b'chira. Let's say the Jewish people were given the opportunity, somehow, to build the base of Bechira. The Vilna Gaon, I saw, actually adjust this. According to the Lieberman edition, the Vilna Gaon gives an example. Okay, this isn't the exact case, but it's a hypothetical case that is an example of other ones where somehow the Am Yisrael couldn't do Pesach Rishon. Okay, that's what it means. There was no Beis Hamikdash, for example, and now they're able to build the Beis Hamikdash before Pesach Sheni. Okay, Lav Dafka Vilna Gaon means that maybe they had the Beis Hamikdash, but they were just Am Yisrael could not do Pesach Rishon, and now Pesach Sheni rolls around. All of Am Yisrael missed it. Or what is another possible example? Okay, whatever. That's the point. It says Nitam Lam Yisrael livno beida bechira hayachid oseh Pesach Sheni ve'ena tzibur oseh Pesach Sheni. Individuals who missed Pesach Rishon because the temple was not in service during the first Pesach can do the Pesach Sheni, but the tzibur can't do a Pesach Sheni if they missed Pesach Rishon. What does that mean? If there was no Beis Hamikdash, so both the Yachid and the Tzibur didn't have a chance to do Pesach Rishon. So what does he mean? Yachidim do Pesach Sheni and the Tzibur doesn't do Pesach Sheni. What is the nafkamina here? Okay, isn't Korbon Pesach itself, the nature of Korbon Pesach is kind of strange because every individual has to do Korbon Pesach, but it is sort of like a Korbon Tzibur in that it has a set time, and that's why it's Doche the Tuma, and that's why it's Doche Shabbos and all these other halachas. So this is a very interesting idea that I can't fully describe what he means over here, but conceptually speaking, we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda anyways. So that's why the Rambam doesn't bring it. That's why, for example, you're not going to find it. It's not in the Gemara, so you're not going to have other Rishonim discuss this. But here they're bringing up this concept that no Beis Hamikdash, Pesach Rishon. Now there's a Beis Hamikdash. Can we do a Pesach Sheni or not? This would be the case. This is the case that they're trying to that they tried to do yesterday. They're trying to say there was no Beis Hamikdash Pesach Rishon. That's why it didn't happen, not because Pesach Rishon didn't happen the right way. They're saying no Pesach Rishon whatsoever. So Rabbi Yehuda would say whatever that means. Yechidim do it, but the Tzibur doesn't. Okay, that's what he says. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afa Tzibur. Sorry, 1 second. That was the statement. I read it wrong. 1 second. Says Eina Tzibur. What he should say is. Hayachid oseh Pesach Sheni, ve'ena tzibur oseh Pesach Sheni, and Rabbi Yehuda says Afat tzibur oseh Pesach Sheni. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda then says perhaps also the tzibur does a Pesach Sheni. That's his opinion. I'm going to check the Lieberman one just to make. I'm sorry, the Zuckermandel to make sure it's okay. I don't have the Lieberman one in front of me, by the way. It's on the bookshelf there, so it'll be tough. But I have the Zuckermandel over here that as Steinsaltz has it. Just going to compare this and make sure it's over here, there is a different girsa. Beis HaBechira, that's the Beis HaMikdash. I was looking over here, and the Zuckermandel says Beis Habira, or just Habira, which is the palace, just another reference to the Beis HaMikdash, but the point is the same. Yeah. So Rabbi Yehuda continues. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, should be Rabbi Yehuda over here. Maaseh v'chiskio HaMelech, shemi asa. In this case, it means he caused him to do it. And in other editions, it says she'isa. They spell the yud, but it means it's the asay verb in the PL form, which means there should be a chirik under the ayin and a dagesh in the sin. Means he caused others to what? Edat tzibur la'aso Pesach Sheni. What Chizkiyahu HaMelech did was made the tzibur do Pesach Sheni. What do they mean over here? Here's what it means. We originally said that only individuals, the non-rov, the Yechidim, are the ones who have to do Pesach Sheni. That means the rov of the Tzibur, the majority were able to do Pesach Rishon. So the individuals who missed it, they could do Pesach Sheni. But there is no Pesach Sheni that you'd have the rov, the Tzibur doing it. The Tzibur in this case means the rov. Why? Because if the rov needs to do it, that means the rov didn't do Pesach Rishon. But if the Rov didn't do Pesach Rishon, then there is no such thing as Pesach Sheni. So he's trying to actually bring up a proof to this position that actually there is precedent for this. That's what Chizkiyahu HaMelech did. Chizkiyahu HaMelech basically told everybody, don't do Pesach Rishon Nisan. Instead, wait until you're all pure, and then you could do Pesach Sheni. And that's how he interprets this verse over here in Devar Yomim. Ki marbita am rabat me Ephraim Hashem mi Sachar mi Zebulun lo itaru. Rabbi Shimon Omer lo mipnei she'isa or he'esiya. I don't know. This doesn't. I'm not quite sure how they want us to pronounce this at a tzibur. It doesn't mean that Chizkiyahu HaMelech had the tzibur, the majority, do Pesach Sheni. Ela Neshe Iber Nisan Bisan Shein Me'abrin Ela Adar Rishon. Okay, Ela Adar. Okay, so he disagrees. He says that's not exactly what happened over here. What happened was not as Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda basically is saying that unlike this interpretation, remember we saw that there was kind of a confusing. What does it mean that Chizkiyahu Melech pushed off Pesach? Rabbi Yehuda was saying that Nisan went through like it was supposed to. Just they skipped Pesach. They didn't have a Korbon Pesach that month, and then in ER the second month they did Korbon Pesach. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, and Rabbi Shimon is saying he didn't do that. Instead, he had them make a Rosh Chodesh. That is, he said that, you know what, this is like the Rambam had and others had based on the Gemara. When it came time to declare Rosh Chodesh Nisan, he had them declare it was just Rosh Chodesh. It was just Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni again. There's a note over here. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, who I don't think is related to necessarily the Rabbi Shimon's, the son of this Rabbi Yehuda, said, Lo mipnei she'asiyat Yisrael la'asot Pesach Sheni. Hold on, I read it wrong. Says here, Omer Mishun Rabbi Shimon, Af mipnei she'asiyat Yisrael la'asot Pesach Sheni, ein osin chavura shel nashim v'avdim uktanim shelo harbot et hatifla. Even though that you have a case like that, where what would happen? Hold on a second. Yeah, this is another problem over here. I just realized there's a different gear, so the one I was using. This should have a stop right over here. There's supposed to be a paragraph break right over here, at least in the Suckermantle edition, and this is the extent of a statement. It says, Af mipnei she'et Yisrael la'asot Pesach Sheni. Even though Chizkiyahu Melech did such a thing, he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda's version of events, he still says it was wrong to do so. Even though he did such a thing, you don't learn anything from it. So let's just break down all these things. This statement over here, Enosin Chavura Shel Nashim Avadim Uktanim Shelo Arbot Et Hatifla, is a separate statement that we've seen in the halacha. So we're going to stop right over here. I'm sorry it doesn't appear correctly in front of me. This is the version I could put on the screen, but it's not the version with which we prepared, and it doesn't fit everything over here. Let's look at these three opinions over here. What is Rabbi Yehuda saying? Rabbi Yehuda, his version of events is that Chizkiyahu Melech basically told everybody, don't do Pesach Rishon, do Pesach Sheni. There's therefore precedent for his opinion that you could have it that the entire tzibur skips Pesach Rishon and ends up doing Pesach Sheni. And Rabbi Shimon gives the opinion with which we are more familiar, saying that what? Well, that's not exactly what happened. What happened was that everybody ended up doing Pesach Rishon. How did they manage to get everybody to do Pesach Rishon? By delaying the start of Nisan. That's the explanation the Rambam gives. So what you have here, according to the Rambam, this is not the halacha, okay? Because Chizkiyahu's example proves something else. Chizkiyahu's example proves that if the Beis Din did what it wasn't supposed to do and add an extra Adar, it's still what they did after the fact counts, and Nisan is Nisan, and that first Pesach goes through. And here, Rabbi Shimon says that even if even though he may have done it like the way Rabbi Yehuda says, that's not the halacha. That's nisht halacha. What do we learn from this? This particular case is basically an example, according to the way we understand it, that there is no historical example of Am Yisrael skipping Pesach Rishon and doing Pesach Sheni. And even if we do have an example, that's not supposed to be the precedent, that's wrong to do so. So too, in the general case mentioned here at the beginning of the Tosefta, if for some reason the Beis HaMikdash wasn't functional for Pesach Rishon, that we can't say, you know what, just have the entire tzibur do Pesach Sheni. No, you can't do it. Only Yechidim can do Pesach Rishon. That is, somehow, if you had no Beis HaMikdash, but you still had Pesach Sheni actually happen, those who missed Pesach Sheni, Pesach Rishon can do Pesach Sheni, unless they're the tzibur, they're the majority. Yes, so what would have happened if we had gone through with Korbon Pesach this year? let's say the 150 people who tried to go, a minimum. I don't know how many people actually had Menuyim. I don't know how many serious attempts there were to bring sacrificial animals to the base of Mikdash. I wouldn't imagine more than 200 or so. There were people who were actually there. Couldn't have gotten more than 200 people. So if those 200 people had succeeded doing Korbon Pesach this year, there still wouldn't have been Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni. Even if they did it B'Tara. Why? Because that would mean that Tzibur, the majority, are pushed to Pesach Sheni, and the majority do not do Pesach Sheni. So yeah, this is pretty clear. From this, we learn that unlike those who are trying to create a new situation on the ground, it's unfortunate. If we missed Pesach Rishon, we will not go through with Pesach Sheni, unless a Sanhedrin sits and actually changes the halacha. But I do not believe they will do so. Why? Because it seems pretty clear also from the scriptural sources that that's the way it's supposed to be. Only Yechidim, the Aish Asher Hu Tahor, U'V'derech Lo Haya, and it says Tamei LaNefesh U'V'derech V'Kol Lachem. It's talking about particular individuals, not the tzibur. Leon, I would imagine you have a question about this, but I think you're pretty much taking it at face value. So we'll leave it at that. Well,
it makes sense. Although I had a thought about what you said in the very beginning of the shiur. It's interesting that in the beginning of the Second Temple period, there were plenty of problems with Shabbat observance and intermarriage and taxation and Trumot and Maserot and everything. But because the nation fought the wars and had a Jewish government and built the temple, they still were zochet to do what they needed to do.
Yes. I think that it's also kind of interesting that it seems from the history books that there was quite long periods of peace in at least the first few centuries of the Second Temple era. The Jewish people lacked, let's say, their own independent malchus for a while, and many of the Jews stayed in Gullus, but they did enjoy, to a certain extent, God's blessing because they built the temple. Yeah, there was major political things going on. The Greeks and the Persians were fighting for control of the world, but that the Jews were left out of it, especially in Bavel. Yeah, I wish that we could somehow go back to a time when we would enjoy God's blessings of peace. It turns out all the times we thought we had peace, let's say in this country, it was just an illusion. It meant that our enemies were stockpiling and just waiting to attack us, just like they're doing now. By the way, even when the war starts, they're still realizing that, oh look, they're just waiting for the next thing.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.